every day of the Trump presidency, or at least until however many days I can keep thinking of stories that I remember, I am going to be sharing a different story a day of different moments of my life that moved me away from, hold on, Obi, what are you eating? Stop, don't eat that. Okay. Moved me away from being very Christian conservative to being a queer leftist. Not like being queer is like an ideology move, but in a sense it is too, in a way. It's complicated, but here we go. So I was homeschooled my whole life. Then I went to a Christian college that was specifically made to help encourage Christian conservative kids to go out into the world and basically take over the government. But before we get into those stories, let's start with high school. So like my senior year of high school, I went to this conference with a group called YAF. I think it was like Young America's Foundation, Young America's Freedom Foundation, Young America's something. It was like YAF. And they had this big conference for people to go to. Basically, if you were like young, a student, you could like go. I think it was like cheap or free. And you basically have all of these different conservative speakers come and talk every day, and then you interact with all these other conservatives and like help to grow the movement or whatever. So I was there. One of the most significant memories I remember about this was I was sitting in this breakout group. There had been like some sort of like discussion on things, broke out into breakout groups. I was sitting at this table with a bunch of boys, and we were talking about poverty. We were talking about like solutions to poverty, ways to address poverty. And they talked the whole time. And like I just sat there, and all of like, mind you, okay, these are high school students, high school college students. There's just like a bunch of boys. Obviously, like a lot of people wouldn't be like, these are the people we need to go to for good solutions on how to solve poverty, right? They were also white. They were also like, by the way that they talked, you could tell that they grew up with money and they never had to want for anything type of thing. I don't know, that I didn't ask them, but like you could kind of tell, like it was obvious enough that like they just didn't really understand how the world worked at all. And I sat there and I listened to them, and basically they ran through, this is how we're going to solve poverty, which wasn't a solution to poverty, mind you. First off, that wasn't really the focus. It was more like, how do we get people to have jobs and work and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And I don't remember all of their specific ideas, but I remember the way that they talked about things was so clear to me that they didn't understand how anything worked. They didn't understand what it was like to not have money. They didn't understand the mentality. They don't understand how people function or how people think. And I was sitting there and I was like, why are these people who have never experienced poverty very clearly the ones that are trying to decide how to fix it? And why is it that like they don't really ask anyone else, or they don't really like pull from resources from people who have experienced this to try to gain an understanding of how to address it? And that was just kind of like a passing thought in my mind, but that stuck as something that I remembered and something that I noticed as a continual theme within conservatism. It's very, very often that people who are not impacted by the policies that they produce are the ones producing them in the Republican Party. And that is super, super sketchy. And I recognized that at like 16, 17 years old. Obviously, like in this specific group, there's some stuff that are like specific to like, yeah, these boys weren't like going and changing the world. But this type of organization was like a filter group to help bring people through the system so that someday, after they finish college or whatever, they're going to be interns, they're going to be like staff people, they're going to move up the line. And this is kind of where they're starting from. They came up with these ideas not because like they just kind of came up with them on their own, but because those same ideas that they were saying were also the same ideas that the people in the conference were saying. And it sounded a lot more stupid when they were saying it than when the people in the conference said it, because at least they had like a little bit more like brevity, a little bit more like, I don't know, just more interesting. But those ideas boiled down to their simplest forms were really bad ideas. And I was like, wow, I don't know how I feel about people who don't have any experience in a specific area writing legislation to address said specific area, not asking people who have ever experienced that specific area. There's also something to be said, it's getting long, I realize, but there's also something to be said about the fact that, like, you might pick something really batshit crazy if it doesn't impact you. You know, like if your solution to poverty is something that's like really horrific, but it never touches you, then like you might be more okay to do that because you recognize that you're not going to be one of the people impacted. So yeah, experience number one.